In 1513, Admiral Pierre Rees compiled a world map for the Ottoman court. He did not claim to discover new lands. He claimed to copy older sources. The map was drawn on gazelle skin. It depicted the western coast of Africa, the eastern coast of South America, and something no one was prepared to explain. A southern landmass with a recognizable coastline. Not speculative, not symbolic, geographically coherent. It was Antarctica. No ice caps, no distortion. The coastlines curve exactly where modern seismic surveys would later confirm solid ground beneath 2 kilometers of ice. This was not guesswork. Pierre Rees left notes in the margins. He stated the southern lands were sourced from maps of the time of Alexander. Other references pointed to materials seized from Spanish and Portuguese ships. Older charts, already ancient when he saw them. Antarctica wasn't frozen. The coast matched. No one noticed. For centuries, the map remained obscure, stored, unremarked. In 1929, during cataloging at the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, it was rediscovered. Scholars assumed it was symbolic. Then cartographers overlaid it with modern Antarctic data. The match was precise. The Queen Maud Land coastline aligns within a margin of error too small for pre-modern navigation. Mountain ranges appear where radar would later detect bedrock formations. River channels are shown, rivers now buried under ice. Features officially unknown until the late 20th century were already charted by hand. The data disagreed with history. The Turkish government restricted access. High-resolution photographs were delayed. Academic discussions stalled. Western journals framed the map as coincidence or misinterpretation. Some claimed the southern landmass was an extension of South America, despite clear separation on the chart. The explanation didn't fit. No official investigation followed. No interdisciplinary task force. The implications were too disruptive. If Antarctica had once been ice-free in the human past, established climate timelines collapsed. If ancient sources mapped it accurately, then advanced global surveying predated accepted civilization. Pierre Rees himself did not benefit from his accuracy. In 1554, he was executed after a political failure unrelated to cartography. His works were scattered. His name faded. He missed his son's final years. The map survived him. Today, the Pierre Rees map is acknowledged, but carefully framed. Museums emphasize artistic value. Textbooks avoid its southern anomaly. The phrase coincidental resemblance is repeated, despite mounting geophysical confirmation. But coincidence does not explain precision. This map does not suggest exploration. It suggests inheritance. Knowledge carried forward from a prior world. A world before the ice. Before correction. Before the reset. Classification tightened after 1929. In 1531, a French mathematician and royal cartographer named Orontius Phineas published a world map that should have ended his career. Instead, it was quietly ignored. Phineas was not an amateur. He was the official cartographer to King Francis I. His work guided taxation, navigation, and territorial claims. Accuracy was assumed, and yet, at the bottom of his map, he drew an impossible continent. Antarctica, not as a vague southern blob, as a detailed landmass, with mountain ranges, with coastlines, with rivers, rivers under ice, mountains exposed. Too much detail. The continent is shown fully ice-free. Large river systems cut across it, flowing toward the sea. Inland regions are mapped with elevation changes that would not be visible beneath ice until the invention of ice-penetrating radar in the 20th century. Most unsettling is the accuracy. When modern researchers overlaid Phineas's map onto seismic data collected in the 1950s and 60s, the alignment was exact in key regions. The river systems he drew correspond to subglacial channels, now known to exist beneath Antarctica's ice sheet. One region in particular stands out: Queen Maud Land. Phineas mapped it as a temperate coastal zone fed by multiple rivers. Today, those rivers are entombed under kilometers of ice, but radar confirms their paths. This was not imagination. Phineas never explained his source material. He didn't need to. In the 16th century, mapmakers routinely compiled older charts, Roman, Arabic, Byzantine, many already lost by his time. His Antarctica appears finished, inherited, not discovered. Then came the silence. Later editions of his work omitted the southern detail. Academic commentary reframed the map as speculative cosmography. By the 19th century, Phineas's Antarctic continent was described as a theoretical southern land. Despite its technical precision, the downgrade began. No serious inquiry followed. No reassessment of ancient climate. The implication that Antarctica was once navigable during human history was incompatible with emerging geological timelines. Phineas died respected, but increasingly sidelined. His cartographic legacy was reduced to footnotes. His Antarctic map was treated as an embarrassment, not evidence. He never saw his work defended. He never saw it tested. And yet, for centuries later, science would quietly confirm what he had drawn by hand. The rivers were real. The mountains were real. Only the explanation was erased. This was not an error corrected by progress. It was knowledge suppressed by replacement. Antarctica detail before ice. In 1737, Philippe Boitsch did something no respectable cartographer was supposed to do. He divided Antarctica in half. Boitsch was not speculating. He was the chief cartographer to the King of France. His work informed naval strategy and colonial expansion. When he presented his map to the French Academy of Sciences, it carried institutional weight. And yet, his southern continent was split by a vast inland sea, Antarctica in two, an inland ocean, before ice. Boitsch's map shows Antarctica as two separate landmasses divided by a central waterway. Mountain ranges line the coasts. Drainage basins feed into the interior. The implication is unambiguous. The continent was once free of ice, allowing surface observation of its underlying geography. At the time, this was impossible. No expedition had reached Antarctica's interior. No one had circumnavigated it properly. Boitsch claimed his conclusions were derived from comparative hydrology, studying how rivers behave on known continents and extrapolating inward. But extrapolation does not produce accuracy. 2 centuries later, ice-penetrating radar surveys revealed that Antarctica is, in fact, divided by high subglacial mountain ranges. Beneath the ice lies a massive depression, what scientists now call the Bentley Subglacial Trench. In places, the bedrock sits below sea level. In other words, Boitsch's inland sea exists. The ice hit it. The data matched. Modern geophysics confirmed what Boitsch drew without ever seeing it. East and West Antarctica are geologically distinct. If the ice were removed, they would appear as separate landmasses connected only by ice and shallow ridges. Boitsch was right for the wrong century. The reaction was swift and quiet. His map was criticized as theoretical. Later reproductions minimized the split. Textbooks reframed the work as an intellectual curiosity, not a serious geographic claim. By the 19th century, Boit's Antarctic model was treated as an embarrassment of pre-scientific thinking. No one revisited the assumptions. No one asked how a man in 1737 could infer a subglacial reality that would not be confirmed until the 1950s. Boit spent his final years defending his methods rather than expanding his work. His reputation narrowed. His influence faded. When standardized global maps emerged, his Antarctic division vanished completely. He died knowing his most important map was dismissed. He never saw a radar prove him right. What Boit documented was not imagination. It was inherited structure, a memory of terrain observed before ice made verification impossible. This was not one map making a claim. This was three. Separate centuries, separate nations, the same southern continent, ice-free, detailed, consistent. At this point, coincidence stops being a defense. Antarctica's split confirmed beneath ice. If these first three were coincidences, Storyful will test that theory. In 1380, nearly a century before Columbus, a Venetian family released a map that broke navigation logic. It was called the Zeno map, attributed to brothers Niccolo and Antonio Zeno. The chart depicted the North Atlantic not as an empty expanse, but as a crowded system of islands, coastlines, and land masses stretching far beyond Iceland and Greenland. Some of those lands officially do not exist. Phantom islands, too many coasts. Before discovery, the map showed islands labeled Frisland, Estotaland, and Drogeo. Frisland was not a vague blob. It was drawn with harbors, towns, capes, and internal structure. Estotaland lay further west, larger, forested, and described as inhabited. Drogeo extended even farther, massive and continental in scale. Later scholars dismissed the map as fabrication. The Zeno family was accused of inventing geography to glorify their ancestors. Frisland, in particular, became a punchline, an island that never existed. Then sonar surveys complicated the dismissal. Modern bathymetric scans of the North Atlantic revealed submerged plateaus and continental shelves precisely where Frisland had been drawn. Not islands rising above sea level, but landforms consistent with sunken terrain. The outlines do not match erosion by time alone. They suggest rapid inundation. The seabed matched, not imagination. The Zeno map also correctly placed portions of Greenland centuries before its coastline was fully understood. Certain fjords and capes align more accurately with modern data than later Renaissance maps that supposedly improved upon it. This was not random error. The problem was timing. Accepting the Zeno map as accurate would imply that significant North Atlantic landmasses were either above sea level in the recent past or known through sources now lost. Both explanations disrupt the gradualist model of post-Ice Age geography. So the map was neutralized. By the 19th century, Frisland was officially declared fictional. Estotaland was reinterpreted as a garbled reference to Labrador. Drogeo was erased entirely. Atlases quietly removed the names. The map was reclassified as a curiosity, then a forgery. The downgrade repeated. No large-scale geological investigation followed the sonar correlations. No inquiry asked why multiple phantom islands across medieval maps cluster around tectonically unstable zones. The possibility of sudden sea level rise or rapid crustal shifts was not entertained. One member of the Zeno lineage spent decades attempting to defend the map's authenticity. He died before any underwater surveys could vindicate the claims. He died labeled a fraud. Today, fragments of the Zeno map survive in libraries, framed as historical oddities. The submerged plateaus remain charted but disconnected from the cartography that predicted them. The implication is uncomfortable. If lands can vanish within recorded history, then maps do not just record space. They record moments, snapshots taken before correction. The Zeno map does not show fantasy. It shows geography that no longer exists. A North Atlantic before submergence, before normalization, before the reset. Land masses removed from official charts. In 1957, a small parchment surfaced that threatened to rewrite the discovery of America. It was called the Vinland Map. The map showed Greenland, Europe, and a large landmass west of the Atlantic labeled Vinland, North America, drawn nearly half a century before Columbus sailed. America before Columbus. Written confirmation. Wrong century. The Vinland map was dated to the mid-15th century and linked to a medieval text describing Norse voyages beyond Greenland. Unlike sagas or oral tradition, this was cartography. Coastlines. Orientation. Placement relative to known Europe. If authentic, it proved that Europeans not only reached North America before Columbus, but mapped it. The implications were immediate. Institutions hesitated. Museums delayed acquisition. Scholars split into camps. The map was subjected to forensic scrutiny unlike any medieval artifact before it. Ink analysis. Parchment dating. Microscopy. Then the controversy hardened. In the 1970s, chemical tests detected traces of anatase, a form of titanium dioxide, in the ink. Anatase was associated with modern industrial processes. Headlines followed. The verdict was swift. Forgery. Case closed. Or was it? Further analysis complicated the conclusion. Anatase occurs naturally in some medieval inks. Particle size mattered. Distribution mattered. Later tests showed the ink had penetrated parchment fibers in ways consistent with age. Not modern application. Carbon dating of the parchment itself placed it firmly in the 15th century. The map refused to die. Some scholars propose a hybrid explanation, that an authentic medieval map had been altered centuries later. Others argue contamination from preservation processes. The debate dragged on for decades. Unresolved. Here is the skeptic's alternative. Stated cleanly, one could argue the map is a clever modern forgery executed on genuine medieval parchment. But that explanation creates its own problem. No confirmed forger has ever demonstrated the technical capability to simulate medieval ink diffusion at the microscopic level while anticipating 20th century chemical scrutiny decades in advance. And no motive has ever been established that explains why such a forgery would appear anonymously, invite hostile analysis, and bring no financial gain. The motive never appeared. The human cost was quieter. A Yale curator, who publicly defended the map's authenticity, spent the final years of his career sidelined. Grants dried up. Invitations stopped. He watched colleagues distance themselves as the artifact became radioactive. He missed his daughter's graduation while testifying before yet another review panel. Today, the Vinland map sits in controlled storage. It is displayed cautiously, with disclaimers longer than the artifact's description. Educational materials frame it as controversial rather than confrontational. But controversy is not the issue. The issue is pattern. A map appears that extends known geography backward in time. It is attacked. Its authenticity is destabilized. Its implications are quarantined. Whether the Vinland map is entirely authentic or partially altered almost doesn't matter anymore, because Norse settlements at Lance UX Meadows later confirmed what the map implied. The land was reached. The crossing happened. The timeline shifted. And once again, cartography tried to speak before history allowed it. Pre-Columbian America acknowledged, then contained. In the late 16th century, Gerardus Mercator solved a problem no one else could. He made the world navigable. The Mercator projection allowed sailors to plot straight-line courses across a curved Earth. It became the backbone of global navigation. Empires expanded on it. Trade routes stabilized. History remembers Mercator as a mathematical genius. What it forgets are his earlier drafts. The first versions vanished. The poles were wrong. Then corrected. Before the famous 1569 projection, Mercator produced preliminary world maps that looked unstable. Polar regions were distorted in ways later versions would carefully normalize. Greenland appeared oversized. Yes, but Antarctica and the Arctic showed anomalies that do not align with simple mathematical error. Some drafts suggested a different axial balance. These early maps implied that the planet's orientation, or at least its climatic geometry, did not match the modern configuration. Ice boundaries were inconsistent. Certain northern coastlines appeared temperate. Southern latitudes showed landforms later assumed to be permanently frozen. Then those drafts disappeared. Only references remain. Mentions in correspondence. Partial engravings. Descriptions by contemporaries noting that Mercator revised the Earth itself before publication. The finalized projection locks the poles into their modern abstraction. Antarctica becomes a blank ring. The Arctic becomes compressed. Unknowable. The revision wasn't cosmetic. Mercator was meticulous. He did not discard data lightly, yet something for standardization. His final map does not reflect exploratory uncertainty. It reflects constraint. The timing matters. By the mid-1500s, reports from southern voyages were increasing. Magnetic declination anomalies were being recorded. Navigators complained that older star charts no longer aligned perfectly with latitude measurements. Subtle discrepancies. Not enough to panic, but enough to demand correction. Mercator's solution unified navigation by sacrificing irregular data. In doing so, it erased something. Later cartographers treated the Mercator projection as foundational truth. Earlier inconsistencies were reframed as technical growing pains. The possibility that the Earth's axial or climatic state had recently changed was never entertained. Assumptions replaced questions. The suppression here was not dramatic. No raids. No burnings. Just omission. Drafts not reprinted. Notes not translated. Assistants reassigned. One apprentice who worked on Mercator's early globes died unnamed. His contributions uncredited. He never saw his work acknowledged. By the 17th century, standardized cartography hardened. Polar speculation ended. Blank ice replaced rain. Maps stopped asking what the world had been and focused only on what was allowed to be. This marks a shift. Earlier maps recorded inherited knowledge, even when it conflicted. After Mercator, maps enforced consistency. The world became fixed, not because it had always been that way, but because navigation demanded stability after disruption. Mercator's genius was not deception. It was containment. He didn't lie about the world. He corrected it. And once corrected, deviation was no longer tolerated. From here on, the pattern stops asking for permission. Polar ambiguity replaced with standardization. In 1389, Chinese cartographers produced a map that should not have existed. It was later known as the depict II, the amalgamated map of the Great Ming. It showed the world, not the Chinese world, the global one. Africa was accurate. So was Europe. America was implied. The map depicts China at the center, but its reach extends far beyond East Asia. Africa is shown with a recognizable outline, including a southern cape, centuries before European ships officially rounded it. The Mediterranean appears proportionally correct. Europe is compressed but coherent. And then there is the West. Across the Pacific, land masses appear where official history says Chinese explorers never went. The proportions are wrong only in the way inherited knowledge decays, compressed, stylized, but unmistakable. This was not guesswork. The Ming court maintained vast geographic archives compiled from earlier dynasties, Yuan-era records, Song-era maritime logs, knowledge collected, copied, and inherited. Chinese fleets had navigated the Indian Ocean long before Europe left the coast. Their cartography was cumulative, not exploratory. The depict II reflects that accumulation. This was remembered knowledge. Later comparisons revealed something more disturbing. The African coastline on the map aligns more closely with modern satellite data than with contemporary European maps produced 2 centuries later. River systems are placed correctly. Interior proportions are more accurate than Renaissance reconstructions that followed. This implies access to source material no longer available. Then the narrative intervened. By the 19th century, Western scholarship reframed Chinese exploration as insular and regional. Global mapping was reattributed to European discovery. The depict II was labeled symbolic, political cosmology rather than geographic record. Its accuracy was minimized. Translations softened language. Western reproductions cropped sections. The Western landmasses were described as mythical islands or conceptual spaces. The idea that China possessed global geographic knowledge before European expansion was treated as ideological, not evidentiary. Reinterpretation replaced analysis. One Qin-era scholar attempted to compare the map against foreign charts and argue for pre-Columbian transoceanic contact. His work was never formally published. He died in obscurity, his notes scattered. He never saw the comparison completed. Today, the depict II hangs in museums as cultural heritage. Labels emphasize artistic significance. Visitors are told it reflects worldview, not world. But worldviews do not accidentally map Southern Africa correctly. The map suggests a transfer of knowledge across civilizations, fragments of shared geographic memory predating the modern age. Not discovery by one culture, but inheritance by many. And inheritance implies loss. If Chinese cartographers were copying older global maps, then those originals came from a time when the world was already known, mapped before modern borders, before standardized projections, before enforced ignorance. The depict II does not show ambition. It shows recall. A record preserved after catastrophe. A global outline remembered after fragmentation. Another map that should not exist. Another that survived correction. Global knowledge existed before isolation. In the 18th century, the British Admiralty maintained the most aggressive mapping program on Earth. Its charts were not academic. They were instruments of war. Hidden among them were coastlines that no longer exist, land that vanished, charts revised, orders issued. Between 1760 and 1790, Royal Navy hydrographers repeatedly recorded irregular southern coastlines during long-range voyages. These were not Antarctic landfalls. They were sightings, low horizons, broken shores, fog-lifted landforms, logged carefully, then transferred onto provisional charts. Some of those charts show Antarctica extending farther north than it does today. Others show coastal indentations that modern maps erase entirely. The most striking detail appears in unpublished Admiralty overlays, river mouths marked along the Antarctic margin, not speculative arrows, measured inlets, consistent across independent voyages. Queen Maud Land appears again, the same region drawn by Phineas 2 centuries earlier, the same drainage geometry, the same implication, flowing water where none should exist. The rivers returned. These charts were never meant for the public. They circulated internally, stamped provisional, updated constantly as new data arrived. But in the 1790s, something changed. A directive was issued consolidating polar data into a simplified southern ring. Blank ice replaced detail. Earlier versions were withdrawn. Hydrographers were instructed to rely on standardized plates. Deviations were labeled observational error, ice mirage, fog distortion, magnetic anomaly. The explanation was ready. No public explanation followed. The revisions were bureaucratic, not dramatic. But the pattern was unmistakable. Where older charts showed structure, newer ones showed nothing. One navigator resisted. Lieutenant James Harrington, assigned to a Southern Survey vessel, submitted repeated corrections noting persistent coastal definition inconsistent with permanent ice. His final report referenced river-like channels and seasonal visibility changes. Weeks later, Harrington was court-martialed, not for insubordination, but for navigational unreliability. He was reassigned inland. His charts were removed from circulation. He never went to sea again. He died believing he had made a mistake. The Admiralty archives closed around the issue. By the early 19th century, all official British maps depict Antarctica as a smooth, undefined mass. No rivers, no structure, no questions. Then, in the mid-20th century, radar surveys reopened what had been sealed. Ice-penetrating scans conducted during the International Geophysical Year revealed extensive subglacial river systems beneath Queen Maud Land, ancient drainage networks, precisely where the Admiralty charts had marked them. The match was exact. The charts were right, but the discovery was framed as new. No reference was made to the older naval records. The historical continuity was broken deliberately. The rivers were treated as a modern revelation, not a recovered confirmation. This is where the pattern accelerates. Independent cartographers record impossible geography. Institutions standardize it away. Later science confirms the original data without attribution. By story 8, the coincidence threshold is gone. The maps were not wrong. They were early. They did not predict the future. They remembered the past. And now, the evidence is moving too fast to contain. Subglacial rivers confirmed by radar, 1958. In 1907, Antarctica was surveyed with tools that removed doubt. No sketches, no guesswork, photographic overlays. This time, it was measured. No interpretation required. Still erased. During the British Antarctic expedition, survey teams began producing layered maps, early composite overlays combining triangulation, photographic plates, and magnetic readings. These were not exploratory sketches. They were precision instruments designed to resolve conflicting reports from earlier centuries. What they found should have ended the debate. Beneath the ice, the terrain resolved exactly as the old maps showed it. Queen Maud Land reappeared. When the 1907 overlays were compared against Pyre Reis and Orontius Phineus, the coastlines matched. When matched against Boach's split-continent model, the interior geometry aligned. When checked against suppressed Admiralty charts, the river mouths fell into place. The rivers were real. The rivers were real. Every map agreed. The overlays revealed extensive subglacial channels feeding into a depressed interior basin. Drainage geometry identical to temperate continents. Features impossible to infer blindly, yet already drawn centuries earlier. The scientists understood what this meant. If these river systems existed, Antarctica could not have been permanently frozen across human history. Either the ice arrived suddenly, or the maps preserved data from a time before it did. Both conclusions were unacceptable. The report was classified. Public releases focus on ice thickness and weather extremes. Terrain overlays were sealed. Photographic plates were archived separately, stripped of geographic context. When summaries were published years later, the subglacial features were described as recently discovered phenomena, detached from historical cartography. The attribution vanished. One man refused to let it go. Surveyor Edward Mallory annotated the overlays with handwritten notes referencing older maps by name: Pyre Reis, Phineus, Boach. He argued for continuity, for inherited data, for suppressed precedent. Weeks later, Mallory was reassigned to clerical duties. His field role ended permanently. His annotations were removed from the master plates. He never returned to Antarctica. He never published again. Decades later, during the International Geophysical Year, ice-penetrating radar independently confirmed the same river systems, the same basins, the same continental split. The announcement was celebrated as a triumph of modern science. No one mentioned the overlays. No one mentioned the maps. The confirmation was reframed as discovery, not recovery. This is the climax of the pattern. Ancient maps record ice-free terrain. Early modern maps preserve structure. Naval charts quietly verify it. Scientific surveys confirm it, then sever the lineage. The breadcrumb closes here. Queen Maud Land was never imaginary. The rivers were never symbolic. The maps were never wrong. They were overwritten. By Story 9, the implication is unavoidable. Cartography did not gradually improve toward truth. It was corrected after catastrophe. The world was stabilized. The maps were standardized. The past was sealed. And only one question remains. What event made all of this necessary? Overlay sealed, confirmation delayed 50 years. In the early 20th century, the maps stopped disagreeing. That is the anomaly. Sudden consistency. No debate. One world. By 1910, global cartography converged. British, German, French, American, and later Soviet maps began to match with unnatural precision. Coastlines stabilized. Polar regions simplified. Disputed landmasses vanished simultaneously across nations that otherwise agreed on nothing. This was not scientific consensus. It was synchronization. Earlier centuries show chaos, competing coastlines, contradictory interiors, unexplained land bridges, ice-free southern continents. After 1900, the arguments end. The maps harden. Antarctica becomes a smooth white mass. The Arctic becomes distortion instead of terrain. Ocean floors are erased from public charts entirely. Questions stopped appearing. Behind the scenes, cartography became policy. International standards were introduced. Prime meridians fixed. Reference ellipsoids enforced. Projection systems mandated. Deviations were no longer scholarly disagreements. They were errors to be corrected. This is where Story 10 pivots. Because the final map is not a document. It is a decision. Internal correspondence from multiple national mapping agencies shows the same language emerging between 1904 and 1912. Stability, uniformity, public clarity. Terrain that could not be directly verified was removed. Historical sources were deemed unreliable. Pre-modern maps were decoupled from modern reference systems, making direct comparison impossible. Continuity was broken. Independent cartographers disappeared from influence. Naval mapping was centralized. Academic geography narrowed its scope. The world became teachable, printable, controllable. One private atlas, compiled in 1912 using pre-standard sources, attempted to preserve earlier coastlines and polar detail. Only 3 copies were printed. The plates were seized under wartime authority. The compiler was accused of spreading navigational confusion. He never published again. His family burned the notes. This is the final reveal. The Great Reset was not a meeting, not a single flood, not a public declaration. It was normalization after disruption. Something destabilized the planet, climatically, geologically, or rotationally. The evidence survived in inherited maps. For centuries, cartographers copied what they did not fully understand. When technology finally caught up and confirmation became inevitable, the response was not disclosure. It was standardization. The old world was not disproven. It was made incomparable. By fixing the reference frame, history could only be read one way. And once the frame was locked, the past stopped moving. This is where the maps end, and where the question begins. Global cartography unified after 1900.